Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching ASEAN in Focus. And we're coming to you live from Manila and Vietnam. Hello, Eliana. How are you?
Hello, Alma. I'm good. I'm Eliana Faith Sebastian from EBC Vietnam Bureau, giving you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines, Russia and a number of Southeast Asian countries kicked off their first ever joint naval exercise along the Strait of Malacca, one of the world's most important shipping lanes, according to the Indonesian Navy.
The Department of Health vowed to make vaccination centers more accessible in the next round of its national vaccination days this month to encourage more people to get inoculated against COVID-19.
Meron tayong 2 million
Cambodia and Laos have agreed to boost cooperative efforts at combating drugs and transnational crimes and expedite the demarcation of the 14% of the border between the two countries that has yet to be clearly drawn.
And Vietnam's spectacular terraced rice fields.
First in our news, Russia and a number of Southeast Asian countries kicked off their first ever joint naval exercise along the Strait of Malacca, one of the world's most important shipping lanes, on Wednesday, according to the Indonesian Navy. The drills come at a time of growing tensions in the Pacific, particularly around the South China Sea, which Beijing claims almost in its entirety. All 10 members of ASEAN, Southeast Asia's regional bloc, participated in Wednesday's drills. Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, Myanmar, and Brunei provided warships or aircraft, with the Philippines taking part as a virtual observer. The exercises will continue until Saturday. This exercise is about peace, stability, and prosperity in the region. That's according to Russia's ambassador to the bloc, Alexander Ivanov, in a statement. Indonesian First Fleet Commander Arsyad Abdullah said the exercise would enhance the interoperability and understanding between the Russian and ASEAN militaries. One analyst told AFP the exercise would reaffirm the ASEAN's bloc principle of non-alignment, particularly given regional tensions. Connie Rahakundini Bakri, an Indonesian military analyst from the Institute of Defense and Security Studies, said, quote, "It's important for the U.S. or it's important for us to ensure the balance of power in our region, to reiterate that this is a non-aligned region," unquote. The bloc has previously held drills alongside the U.S. and Chinese navies, while Indonesia and the United States held their biggest ever annual military exercise known as Garuda Shield in August.
Malacanang said on Wednesday Bloomberg showed little consideration for local data when it again placed the Philippines at the bottom of its COVID-19 resilience ranking. The Philippines was ranked 53rd on the list, the same slot it got in September. DOH Secretary Francisco Duque III even went as far as calling it unfair. Let's listen in.
You know why it's unfair? They sliced it off just where the Philippines was going to be the last. Remember, there are 200 nations. Okay, why are you going to slice it off where, I could have sliced it off at number 10 and say whoever is number 10 is kulelat, di ba? So doon pa lang is, rather strange. In terms of our vaccination rate, we're improving a great deal.
Hindi naman maganda sabihing last place. Last place sa mga bansa na in-evaluate nila. So talagang may question ko talaga yung basis and strength of their metrics. Medyo problematic nga kung nating susuriin.
In a statement, acting presidential spokesperson Carlo B. Nograles noted that Bloomberg gave emphasis to a general of criteria such as severity, flight capacity, and vaccinated travel routes in making its assessment. Despite the criticism, Nograles said the Bloomberg list is still useful in evaluating local pandemic response and will not likely affect local policies. In the November round of its COVID-19 resilience ranking, Bloomberg placed the Philippines at the bottom of the list, which assessed the COVID response of 53 countries. The Philippines was ranked 53rd on the list, the same slot it got in September.
In other news, the Civil Aviation Authority of Vietnam, or CAAV, has agreed with the Ministry of Health's proposal on the suspension of international flights to and from some African countries due to the concerns over the COVID variant Omicron. Earlier, on November 28, the ministry proposed that the government should suspend flights to and from South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Eswatini, Lesotho, and Mozambique, and halt the entry of arrivals with travel record to these countries. The CAAV reported that Vietnam's border remains largely closed, except for occasional repatriation flights to bring Vietnamese overseas home and flights arranged under pilot tourism reopening program to 5 selected destinations, namely Da Nang City, Quang Ninh, Quang Nam, Can Hoa, and Kiên Giang provinces. Now, all of these flights require the agreement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of National Defense, and Ministry of Public Security. On November 30, Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh tasked the Ministry of Health to closely monitor and provide updates on the evolution of COVID-19 variant Omicron in order to design the proper and effective response measures.
Ho Chi Minh City has decided to reopen schools for students of 1st, 9th, and 12th grades from December 13, while 5-year-old kids may return to schools 2 weeks later. The decision will be implemented on a pilot basis for 2 weeks, according to a document issued recently by the Municipal People's Committee. Meanwhile, 5-year-old kids may be allowed to come back to schools on December 27. After the trial period, schools will draw up lessons learned and propose if physical learning could be resumed across the city from January 3, 2022. The southern city has administered the first COVID-19 vaccine jabs to almost all children aged 12 to 17 and is preparing to give them the second shots. Reopening schools is a significant issue for a city of 1.7 million students like Ho Chi Minh City, as the epidemic situation has improved, with many locals becoming green zones or areas at low risk of COVID-19 transmission, said Chairman of the Ho Chi Minh City People's Committee, Phan Van Mai. Virtual classes have caused many difficulties for students, since many of them have no computers or laptops for remote learning.
During a joint press conference between Singapore and Malaysia, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said they want more open borders, even if the new Omicron coronavirus variant disrupts plans to expand the vaccinated travel lane, or VTL, between both countries. Let's listen in.
But we will progress step by step and get it working first. As the situation increases, we will raise the travel volumes. We aim to expand the VTL land also to include travelers, general travelers, that means not citizens and long-term residents, from mid-December onwards, taking into account the public health situation. I also discussed with the PM about a VTL-C and resuming port calls by Singapore cruise ships to Malaysian ports. And we agreed to work towards aligning safe cruise standards and start discussions on these matters, piloting port calls between Singapore and Malaysia, and also possible VTL to travel between Tanah Merah Terminal and Desaru in Johor. Of course, all this is COVID-19 permitting, because we are all watching anxiously to see what the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 does and how it will behave. But even if Omicron disrupts these plans, Our goal will still be to have more open borders between Singapore and Malaysia, and I'm quite confident that after some time, we will be able to make further progress.
This morning, I crossed Tambak Johor Causeway and was received by PM Lee at Woodlands Checkpoint. This in itself is very significant. It symbolizes the reopening of our borders through the launching of VTL, Vaccinated Travel Lane, and simultaneously, we also launched VTL Air. This is part of our gradual reopening of our borders to facilitate travels between the two countries.
According to a Channel News Asia report, Malaysia's Health Minister Khairi Jamaluddin said that authorities detected a COVID case through an on-arrival antigen rapid test conducted at the Johor entry point of the causeway. Authorities are confirming the positive result using a polymerase chain reaction test and assessing if passengers who traveled on the same bus need to be quarantined or subjected to other restrictions.
Travelers from Singapore arrive at the Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia as coronavirus curbs limiting movement between the two countries was lifted Monday. Let's take a look.
Amazing, really amazing. Very glad, grateful. I'm back home. I'm very happy to be back home in Malaysia. I get to see my dad. It's emotional.
Oh, fantastic. This is what we are looking for. Yeah, really, really. I mean, it's so nice to come back to this country without having been quarantined. And I think the guys inside have been fantastic. They're working very hard.
And, the non-quarantine thing is really helpful because it will be very not meaningful if we go there and then we have to spend, long quarantine period. And of course, the cost involved as well. I mean, we are very excited because we haven't seen our grandchildren, and we even have a new grandchild there, which we haven't really seen.
Before the pandemic, about 300,000 people used to commute across the border from Malaysia every day to Naples can cross the 1-kilometer causeway separating the countries without having to quarantine. Both Malaysia and Singapore, which were part of the same country during a stormy two-year union in the 1960s, have high vaccination rates. Singapore's outbreak has been mild by global standards, although Malaysia faced a serious wave this year driven by the Delta variant. Malaysians have long been a key part of the workforce of wealthier Singapore, which has a population of just 5.5 million, and then can typically earn higher salaries than back home. The easing of curbs comes despite the emergence last week of the heavily mutated Omicron strain, which is starting to spread around the world.
In other news, back here in the country, a total of 1,839,846 college students have now been vaccinated against COVID-19, according to Commission on Higher Education, or CHED Chair Prospero de Vera on Wednesday. In an online media briefing, the professor said the figure is, or the doctor said the figure is equivalent to 45.91% of the tertiary student population, which has reached 4 million, over 4 million as of November 25. Again, let's listen in.
As of November 25, we are close to 2 million students already out of the approximately 4 million students. So our vaccination rate now for students as of November 25 is 45.91%. That is a significant increase because after the first 2 weeks of vaccination in October, our vaccination rate was less than 30%. I think it started off at about 22%. We're now in 45%, almost 46% vaccination rate for students. There are still problematic areas, including Region 5, Region 12, Mimaropa. Some of this because of like in Mimaropa, because of the island character of the area. But there are areas like Region 9 where the vaccination level is about 75% already. So what we are doing in this vaccination for students is we are pushing for school-based vaccination. Easier to track if it is school-based vaccination because first of all, the schools have a master list of their students.
Now, earlier, Ched said school-based vaccination is easier because schools have master lists of vaccinated and unvaccinated students, and they have the facilities for appropriate inoculation activities. Meantime, some 239,431 or 82.45% of the 290,380 higher education institute personnel, both teaching and non-teaching, have been vaccinated.
The Department of Health vowed to make vaccination centers more accessible in the next round of its national vaccination days this month to encourage more people to get inoculated against COVID-19. In a Business Mirror report, National Vaccination Operations Center Chairperson Mirna C. Kabutahe made the commitment last Wednesday after initial figures of the first NVD failed to meet targets. The government was targeting to inoculate 3 million people per day during its NVD from November 29 to December 1, 2021. Let's take a look.
Yung ating final numbers ng November 29 ay 2,708,018. As of November 30, 6 a.m., meron tayong 2,292,335. So, yung sa katanungan mo, kung nakatulong yung holiday kahapon o hindi, our numbers are showing that mas mababa ngayon, but these are not final numbers. As of 6 a.m. ito, we will be expecting more numbers later. May nagsasabi na nakatulong ang holiday kasi they were able to go to the vaccination sites. Pero may mga feedback din na they work because it was double pay. And then there were some problems because they were not accommodated during the vaccination times. May mga bakuna centers na nagsara ng mas maaga. So for the 2 days, we have now a cumulative accomplishment of 5,353,000. Total natin, Music Rapi, ay 5,353,000. We are still hopeful na ma-meet natin yung 9 million targets, but just in case we will be unable to reach it, this is a record already high of our accomplishments. Kasi nga, dati-dati mga 1 million lang tayo, 1.5, ngayon naka 2.7, 2.2. So talagang nakikita na pagtulong-tulong tumataas yung ating accomplishments. Sa unang-una, gagawin natin mas madali yung proseso. I-increase natin yung registration area kasi yun ang kanilang mga complaint na hindi na-accommodate. May mga long queues. While we appreciate na gusto ng ating mga lokal na pamahalaan na meron silang mga pre-registration, nakikita naman natin that they do not really pre-register. So if we can accommodate more walk-ins, we can extend our hours vaccination. Tapos yung utos po ni Presidente na sana ay wag magpauwi ng nakalinya na sa bakunahan. So no walk-in should be sent home without being vaccinated.
Kabota has said they are still consulting with local chief executives if they will retain the 9 million target in the second national vaccination days. The World Health Organization earlier said it supports the conduct of the additional national vaccination drive to further increase the number of Filipinos who are protected against COVID-19.
And the news continues here on ASEAN in Focus. We'll be right back.
Kahit ano pang trip nyo, sasakyan namin yan.
It was at this moment that he knew.
Ganito raw mag-drive ang pogi.
Kapag na-shoot to, mag-move on ako sa'yo. Walang mag-move on.
Mag-enjoy din kayong makilaro sa ating Game of the Day.
Happy yarn.
Basta talaga friends na nakikita sa internet, ginagaya. Gayang-gaya.
Nakamatala naman doon sa computer. Tapos naka-aircon ka pa. Alam ko, laki-laki na pin natin.
Funniest Nakaball Videos.
Welcome back. In Vietnam, floods triggered by heavy rains in some central provinces have left 10 people dead and missing, according to their National Steering Committee for Natural Disaster Prevention and Control, reporting this on Wednesday morning. The dead and missing people include 3 in Binh Dinh, 6 in Phu Yen, and 1 in Kon Tum, according to the National Steering Committee. Nearly 60,000 houses in Binh Dinh and Phu Yen provinces are now underwater. Local authorities in Quang Nam, Binh Dinh, Phu Yen, and Can Hoa have evacuated 6,030 households to safe areas. More than 641 hectares of rice in Binh Dinh, Phu Yen, and Dak Lak have been damaged.
Some areas in the country will experience scattered rain showers and thunderstorms due to the trough of Typhoon Niato, which is outside the Philippine area of responsibility. Such weather condition will prevail over the Bicol region, Eastern Visayas, and the provinces of Romblon, Aklan, and Capiz. Niato was last located 1,440 kilometers east of central Luzon. Pag-asa cautioned against possible flash floods or landslides in these areas during moderate to, at times, heavy rains. Let's take a look.
So inaasahan po natin na medyo bumababa na ang tsansa na pumasok ng ating PAR, itong si Typhoon Niato. Samantala, amihan naman ang nakaka-apekto pa rin dito sa Luzon. At kung mapapansin po din natin, yung mga kaulapan na nandito po sa may Visayas at Mindanao, ay dulot po yan yung trough o yung extension ng bagyong Sinyato.
Meanwhile, the northeast monsoon will cause light rains over Batanes, Cagayan, Isabela, Quirino, Apayao, and Aurora. It will also cause isolated light rains over the rest of Luzon. The rest of the country will have isolated rain showers due to the localized thunderstorms. Moderate to strong winds and moderate to rough seas will prevail over Luzon and the Visayas.
Dozens of Rohingya refugees sent home to a remote and flood-prone Bangladesh island have been allowed to visit relatives for the first time since their relocations began 2 years ago. Nearly 20,000 members of the stateless Muslim minority who fled neighboring Myanmar in 2017 after a brutal military crackdown have already been sent to Bhasan Char Island. Bangladesh has been criticized by rights groups for the relocation plan, which aims to eventually move around 100,000 refugees to ease overcrowding in cramped refugee camps near the coastal city of Cox's Bazar. Authorities on Tuesday allowed 68 Rohingya to leave the formerly barren island to visit their family members on the mainland. A Navy ship took them to Chittagong, and from there they were taken to the camps by 2 buses, according to a Navy spokesman. About 850,000 Rohingya are packed into camps along the Bangladesh-Myanmar border, and most fled the Myanmar military clampdown in 2017 that the United Nations says could be genocide. Bangladesh has been praised for taking in the refugees who poured across the border, but has had little success finding them permanent homes.
Senator Christopher Lawrence Bongo has until Election Day to file his statement of withdrawal from the presidential race. The Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, said on Wednesday. COMELEC spokesperson James Jimenez said the Partido Demokratiko Pilipino Lakas ng Bayan, or PDP Laban, presidential candidate may file his statement of withdrawal until May 9, 2022. He said until Election Day, he can withdraw. On Tuesday, Go announced that he is backing out from the presidential race. Jimenez added that Go's name will be placed in the ballot if he would not file his statement of withdrawal before the printing of the ballots in January 2022. He said if Go's name will be included in the ballot and would decide to formally withdraw on the day of the elections, the votes he received will not be counted. On Tuesday, Jimenez said Go has to personally submit his statement of withdrawal. Jimenez also said substitution would no longer be allowed since the withdrawal is voluntary.
Staying in the country, the Supreme Court has affirmed a Davao court verdict against KLM Royal Dutch Airlines in a suit filed by a prominent physician over delayed luggage back in 1998. In a recent decision penned by Associate Justice Ramon Paul L. Hernando, the High Court, however, ruled to award only 350,000 pesos in damages plus attorney's fees and interest to Dr. Jose Tionco. The original amount awarded by the Davao Regional Trial Court was 3.6 million pesos. Tionco, a prominent surgeon and one of the founders of the Medical Mission Group Hospital and Health Services in Davao City, was invited in October 1998 by the United Nations World Health Organization to be a keynote speaker in Almaty, Kazakhstan in November of that year. In the absence of a direct flight from Manila to Kazakhstan, Tionco had to take a Singapore Airlines flight to Singapore, where he took the connecting flights of his main carrier KLM to Amsterdam and Frankfurt and then to Almaty. The flight departed from Amsterdam 45 minutes late, and as a result, he missed his fourth flight from Frankfurt to Almaty. Informed of his predicament, Dr. Tionco was then booked by KLM to fly to Istanbul on board Lufthansa and from there to his final destination in Almaty. As a result of the change in schedule, Dr. Tionco was left with no choice but to board the flight to Almaty without his luggage. Dr. Tiongco delivered his lecture without any of his visual aids and despite being inappropriately attired. 3 months after Tiongco returned to the Philippines, there was still no news about the whereabouts of his luggage, and in March 1999, he wrote the 3 airlines for compensation. The airline said their liability was limited to $20 per kilo under international air travel rules. In its ruling, the Davao RTC said KLM is solely liable for the damages on account of the lawsuit case and that it failed to exercise extraordinary care in handling it. It also noted that being the airline that issued the tickets, KLM is the principal in the contract and liable for acts and omissions of the other airlines to which it endorsed the other legs of the flight. The court said the airline displayed indifference to the plight and inconvenience suffered by Dr. Tiongco and made empty promises that his luggage would be traveling with him and even failed to inform Dr. Tiongco that his suitcase had been found. Moreover, the court said it did not return the luggage to him even after it was found.
Cambodia and Laos have agreed to boost cooperative efforts at combating drugs and transnational crimes and expedite the demarcation of the 14% of the border between the two countries that has yet to be clearly drawn. In a press release on November 30, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation said the leaders of both countries agreed to further promote cooperation in the prevention and suppression of illegal activities by exchanging and sharing information between the law enforcement authorities working in the border areas. The agreement was reached at the bilateral meeting on November 29 between Prime Minister Hun Sen and his Lao counterpart Pham Viphavan, who was on a 2-day visit to Cambodia from November 29 to 30 on the occasion of the 65th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two nations. Cambodia and Laos have now marked approximately 86% of their common land boundary with a total of 121 border posts. Both prime ministers agreed to task the Cambodia-Laos Joint Boundary Commission with expediting the negotiations on the draft of the treaty on the delimitation of state boundaries between the two countries. Asean in Focus will be back after a short break.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba, sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
This week, we are going to do more of our Pinoy dishes. Kaya ang ating title ng ating episode ay Pinoy tayo! Pampano, palabok, pochero. You cannot leave it Kasi pag iniwan nyo po to, ay magiging gawgaw. Pangkabit nyo na po ng wallpaper. Kanyo na lang, ang kulang.
You and me driving past the coast and trees. The breeze was so sweet, playing our favorite song so deep. The world will never.
Hello everyone! Ako po si Tim Pabino at hindi ko pa rin akong isang letter sender request ngayong linggo, December 5, sa Letters and Music 1 to 2 p.m. dito lamang sa Net25. See ya!
Welcome back. Asian markets were mixed today and oil edged up with traders still trying to claw back their latest Omicron-induced losses, but still full of uncertainty after Wall Street suffered a late plunge in response to the U.S. reporting its first case. News that a patient had come down with a new variant sent shivers through U.S. investors, who fear authorities will be forced to reintroduce strict containment measures or even lockdowns, derailing the recovery in the world's top economy. And that comes on top of a widespread belief the Federal Reserve will end its vast bond-buying financial support program quicker than expected and begin hiking interest rates next year to prevent inflation, now at a 3-decade high from running out of control. Traders were already feeling uneasy in recent weeks on concerns about the sharp rise in prices around the world caused by supply chain snarls, a spike in energy costs, and a labor shortage. The announcement of Omicron and warnings that vaccines may not be as effective against it sent them over the edge on Friday. Tokyo, Shanghai, Sydney, Singapore, Wellington, and Jakarta all fell, but Hong Kong, Seoul, Taipei, and Manila rose.
The Asean Secretariat hosted an interactive webinar to commemorate ASEAN Youth in Climate Action and Disaster Resilience Day on November 25. The webinar brought together ASEAN stakeholders, youth leaders, and champions under the theme Teaming Up with Youth for a Disaster Resilient and Climate-Friendly ASEAN. Representatives of NGOs, CSOs, and private sectors in the field of youth development and empowerment, climate change, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction were also present. Alexa Daniel C. Dayanghirang, Commissioner of the Philippines National Youth Commission, delivered opening remarks to kickstart the virtual event. Let's watch this.
Climate change is a global issue that has impacted our region immensely, and its threats continue to increase. It impacts our ability to thrive and realize our full potential as a youth. The 2021 Climate Risk Index identified ASEAN countries as among the top 15 countries which were most affected by extreme weather events for the past 2 decades. Disasters brought about by the effects of climate change have brought economic and environmental damages to our nations. As we scramble to find solutions to this global threat, there is a tendency to overlook the important role of young people in addressing this issue. The ASEAN youth must act now. Last May 2021, youth participants from ASEAN joined the ASEAN Youth Focus Session on the Committee of Youth in Climate and Action and Disaster Resilience. The recommendations made during the session encapsulate our collective vision for meaningful participation of ASEAN youth in building a truly resilient ASEAN.
The webinar delivered 6 call to action points. First, to provide more inclusive, democratic, and safe platforms and accesses for youth to policy-making spaces and decision-making forums. Next, to highlight the vulnerability of the marginalized groups, especially those who are prone to more violence, hardships, and challenges during disasters and crises. To call on ASEAN member states and ASEAN Secretariat to promote more programs, activities, initiatives that are intersectional, intersectoral, and interdisciplinary to encourage collaborations among ASEAN youth. For youth to make use of the information and communication technology in climate action and disaster resilience initiatives, and for the government to facilitate and address hindrances that youth are facing concerning climate change and disaster resilience. For government and youth to encourage more action-oriented collaborations in dealing with threats and issues related to climate actions and disasters resilience, to ensure the people-centered and rights-based approach in seeking out the solution and building up initiatives and programs which is in line with the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration and ASEAN Charters. In 2018, led by the Philippines through the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Youth and coordination with the ASEAN Committee on Disaster Management, ASEAN leaders adopted a declaration to designate on November 25 of each year as the ASEAN Youth and Climate Action and Disaster Resilience Day. This declaration signified the critical role of ASEAN youth in alleviating crises caused by disasters and climate change and aims to celebrate and promote the contribution of the ASEAN youth towards disaster resilience and climate action.
In other news, Olympic champion Victor Axelsen powered into the world #1 spot on Wednesday after a walkover victory over fellow Dane Rasmus Gemke in the group stage of the World Tour Finals in Indonesia. Axelsen, 27, took men's singles gold at this year's Tokyo Games and moves above Japan's Kento Momota as Gemke withdrew from their match injured. Momota had been the world's leading men's player since September 2018 and also pulled out of his fixture just 1 minute after it started. "I am so sorry to my fans to end up like this," said Momota, who sustained a back injury in training earlier in the day. Momota, who won a record 11 titles in 2019, and Gemke dropped out of the competition as their remaining matches were considered walkovers under the tournament regulations. Axelsen is now favorite for the title and will meet unseeded Indian player Lakshya Sen in his next group match on Thursday today. The World Tour Finals, returning to Asia for the first time in 10 months, is the season ending of 3 consecutive tournaments played in strict biosecure conditions and without spectators.
As the morning sun finds its way through the mist over Vietnam's terraced rice fields, local farmers lead buffalo into the paddies. Located 300 kilometers northwest of Hanoi, Mukang Chai district in northern Yanbai has spectacular terraces which sit up to 1,000 meters above sea level. Let's watch this.
Very nice. Next time we'll show our very own here. Rice terraces, right?
Yes, Alma.
Thank you for joining us, Eliana. Thank you for keeping me company today. You stay safe.
Thank you, Alma. You stay safe too. And that's the latest news in the ASEAN region. I'm Eliana Sebastian from EBC Vietnam Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
And we'll see you back tomorrow. Same time, same place here on ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
Napapansin ba ninyo lumiliwanag ang mundo?